Xanos Report.
Xanos Report.
Welcome to episode 1. Today we're going to be talking about Abduction by John Mack. My name is Raleigh. You're my brother, Travis.
Yep.
Evan's here. He's producing.
Yeah.
We tried to get a mic set up. Didn't work. Don't know why. That's okay.
Yeah, Evan will be on episode 02.
He'll be around. Yeah. So John Mack.
And this is your second time reading this book, right?
This is my second time reading this book. Yeah. We covered this book before on, I think it was episode 24, or that might be the Bob Lazar one, but it's one of the episodes of Night School, the podcast we did before. And I wanted to read it again with a different lens and to present it a little bit better. Production was also, that was like one of our worst produced episodes just because of the situation we were in and the microphones that we had, the room we were in. We were just in our basement. So I wanted to redo it and do it with a different lens. I think I had a feeling that I would feel differently about the book now after the research I've done since then, the books that I've read since then, and the podcasts and things that I've listened to since then. And that was definitely true. And I'm glad that I read it again. And I think it's a really good one to do for the first episode here. John Mack is an exceptionally credible person to be writing this book. John Mack he graduated from Harvard with a psychology degree. He studied child psychology. He studied adolescent psychology, psychology of religion. He was very successful in the field. He worked as a medic in the military for some time, and he won a Pulitzer Prize for a biography he wrote on T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. He was a British military officer who was involved in a leadership and spy role in several big battles during World War I.
Wow.
He's famous for a movie called Lawrence of Arabia that was based on a book that he had written himself about his exploits. So John Mack had written a biography about him that won him the Pulitzer Prize.
So he's successful in medicine, psychology, and literature.
Yes, yeah, and was a military man. Yeah.
Right, yeah, and a soldier.
Yeah.
Does it say MD on there?
Yep, he was a doctor. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, John
crazy.
Mack, MD, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. He eventually became the head of psychology at Harvard, where he got his degree. And at 60, was introduced through a mutual friend to a man named Budd Hopkins. So at this point, he's 60 years old. He's never had any interest in the supernatural or the paranormal or extraterrestrials, anything along those lines. But his friend told him that this guy, Budd Hopkins, who was he was a painter, he was an artist that was living in New York that had gotten interested in the abduction phenomenon because of people that he had met that claimed they had been abducted by aliens. So Budd Hopkins was not a psychologist, was not a hypnotist even, but he was interested in trying to help these people with the feelings that they're going through, with the experiences that they're having. He was setting up support groups for people, so putting together groups of people that have had similar experiences and connecting them with each other so that they had someone to talk about these things with. And he was also doing hypnosis on people, not himself. He wanted to kind of distance himself from the process because he felt that he wasn't qualified to be the hypnotist, so instead he was hiring hypnotists and facilitating these meetings between the abductees and the hypnotists. And a lot of these hypnotists didn't even believe in alien abductions and thought that these would likely be some sort of manifestations of some other trauma that they had gone through in their lives, and that this was just a cover for it.
That's perfect.
A really wise way to go about it.
They're just doing the process and recording the data.
Right. So when John Mack first heard about this guy, Budd Hopkins, from his friend who was like, no, this guy, he has a bunch of really consistent reports from people like that are saying these things have happened to them. And to him, he was immediately dismissive of it. Like, so what? So he found a bunch of crazy people that are willing to be crazy together. Like, why do I care? But his friend was very persistent about having him meet with Budd. And Budd ended up showing him a lot of the case studies and the physical evidence even that he's gotten from these people. Because these people are from all over the country. He was American. He was living in New York. Mack was also living in Boston, where Harvard is. So he was reviewing these case studies with Budd Hopkins and was shocked at how compelling it was, how compelling their similarities in what happens when they're brought aboard these ships, the similarities in how the ships are described, the similarities in how the creatures that do the abductions are described, and the similarities in some of the physical things. Like there are scars that are similar on these people. There are implants even in some cases, like little pieces of metal that are placed in people that may be trackers or some sort of supplement or all kinds of things. Mack doesn't go very far into that in this book. I think that's because this book is really not intended to be like here's all the hard nuts and bolts evidence about aliens and the fact that aliens exist. This book isn't written to try and to prove to people that aliens exist. That's a really hard thing to do, even with physical evidence, because people can come up with all kinds of ways that they're like, well, shit, I don't know that much about metallurgy. Like maybe there is something I don't understand about how we could have made that, but I'm sure it wasn't an alien because that can't be it. So it's often just pointless to try and convince people of that, I suppose. And if he is going to convince people, it's not going to be with materials. It's going to be with his psychological perspective and with his credibility and his background as a psychologist.
Right.
So he doesn't go deep
People aren't
into
convinced by just like systematic databases of information. But if they hear a compelling story from someone they respect and they're given some assistance in how to integrate that information into their paradigm so that they don't break with the new information, so that they at least can accept it if it is true, then maybe they'll look for the solid evidence after the fact.
Right.
But nobody just sees a big bank of evidence and is like, wow, I'm going to change my worldview over this. This is even hard scientists.
Yeah.
No, man. It's not how people
really work that way. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there are some people that work that way, but I don't work that way, and I don't think most people do.
Right.
Yeah. So we reviewed these cases, reviewed all the medical data that he had, and, well, I suppose in a way he was convinced enough to take Budd more seriously after seeing some of this physical evidence. And eventually he started taking referrals. So in 1990, Mack is 60 years old. He thinks that aliens are impossible. There's no chance of that. Over the next 4 years, he's meeting with Budd and having Budd refer people in the Boston area to his practice so that he could do hypnosis on them and he could help collect data with Budd as well. So from 60 to 64, that's what he's doing. And in 1994, he published this book. And this is what he has to say by 1994. What the abduction phenomenon has led me, I would now say inevitably, to see is that we participate in a universe or universes that are filled with intelligences from which we have cut ourselves off, having lost the senses by which we might know them. It has become clear to me also that our restricted worldview or paradigm lies behind most of the major destructive patterns that threaten the human future. Mindless corporate acquisitiveness that perpetuates vast differences between rich and poor and contributes to hunger and disease, ethno-national violence resulting in mass killing, which could grow into a nuclear holocaust, and ecological destruction on a scale that threatens the survival of the Earth's living systems. There are, of course, other phenomena that have led to the challenging of the prevailing materialist/dualistic worldview. These include near-death experiences, meditation practices, the use of psychedelic substances, shamanic journeys, ecstatic dancing, religious rituals, and other practices that open our being to what we call in the West non-ordinary states of consciousness. But none of these, I believe, speaks to us so powerfully in the language that we know best, the language of the physical world. For the abduction phenomenon reaches us, so to speak, where we live. It enters harshly into the physical world, whether or not it is of this world. Its power, therefore, to reach and alter our consciousness is potentially immense. So 4 years later, after meeting with these people, he's fully on board. And it even seems like it may have opened his mind up more to these other things as legitimate means of connecting with spirits or other sorts of entities that may be physical or more ethereal or somewhere in between those two things.
Right. Because in meditation and psychedelics and all that, the stuff that happens is still, according to the physicalist perspective, in the non-existent imagination world.
Right. Yeah. This one is so radically physical. Like there is physical information about it, which is interesting in light of what we were just saying. Yeah, it does seem like the physical nature of the abduction phenomenon did open him up more to these other things. Yeah.
Right. And I wonder, is it just that you'll probably get into this, so I'm just expressing this curiosity but not expecting an immediate answer. I wonder if the abduction phenomena led him to interest in other transpersonal and spiritual and paranormal phenomena just because it exists, or because of what the contents of the abduction experiences end up being.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. And there is some overlap between those other types of experiences and the people that have those other types of experiences and the people that end up a part of the abduction phenomenon. So, which leads into, I was going to say, who are the types of people that are typically being abducted? It does seem like it's more women than men. And that'll make more sense as we get farther into it from a practical standpoint. Over these 4 years, there was over 100 people that he was working with. Of them, some of them he had to cut for various reasons. Had to cut from sort of his sample that he was taking seriously because he sensed some sort of deception or instability or mental illness, some reason to think that what these people are saying is not true, or either deliberately or because they're just not thinking straight and describing something incorrect, or because they want attention and they're coming up with some story because it is interesting. So there are various people that he didn't end up including. All that to say, he didn't just believe anybody that said anything.
Right.
So of the samples that he is using for the case studies that he's using for this book, there were 76 people, 47 women, 29 male. Many of these people also have family members that are abductees or that have had spiritual experiences. And by spiritual experiences, there's a lot of sort of overlap with the abductees and people that have like interactions with entities that we wouldn't traditionally think of as aliens, like monsters in the closet and like following lights when they like seeing lights when they were children, or just weird things that I don't think most people have happened to them. And there seems to be, I was surprised by how many, when reading through these case studies, like all of them have some other weird stuff that have happened or have gone into trances or have had past life experiences, strange things like that.
Right. That makes it hard to talk about these otherworldly subjects because everything is hard to talk to. Everything is hard to talk to a skeptic about. So I don't know why I'm even saying it's hard to talk to a skeptic about, because skeptics don't want to hear anything anyway.
Right.
But
Skeptic's
it's like,
skeptic.
well, that's just one of those weirdos. You know, they're in all that weird stuff, and all that weird stuff's in one category. And I already know that
Sure.
that whole package of that whole category is invalid.
Right.
And so they're just over there.
Right. So for some
that
people,
realm.
that's further evidence to say, okay, so these are just crazy people. Oh, they're having that and that. That doesn't feel that way to me.
Right. Because really, to the physicalist, the otherworldly is so repressed that every part of it is repressed. Like, they're less likely to recall anything strange that happens in their experience because it's blocked out.
True. Yeah. I think that these people seemed to have, there was a few people that seemed to have connections with chi, or like knowledge of chi in their body. One of them was expressly a karate and taekwondo practitioner who was also into chi manipulation, to the point where John Mack believes that he was capable of like force pushing, that sometimes in his sleep he would like accidentally press his chi out. There was a story of him like accidentally pushing his girlfriend out of bed, like throwing her across the room. But it was just because he woke up from a bad dream and accidentally burst out at her. So I don't know, he doesn't go deep into that, but John Mack seems to believe that he was capable of chi manipulation. And it is interesting that would be the type of person that they would want, or that they would go after. Also, an acupuncturist was another one of the case studies, which also has a lot of connections with chi, because acupuncture seems to be about opening the flow of chi through certain blocked points in your body.
Yeah, in the meridians.
In my uneducated understanding, at least. It seemed to me that there was a higher than average ratio of artists, or like artistic people, painters and musicians, things like that. It's something that John brought up that I thought was a very interesting thing to think about with the abduction phenomenon. He said there's four dimensions that he thinks are kind of interesting and unique at least as the four of them together, two people that have gone through abductions. One, there's four dimensions to the trauma that they go through. One, it is essentially a rape-like experience in some ways, and we'll get more into that as we describe it. But these people feel very much like someone who's been raped. They have a fear of recurrence and no real understanding of what they would do if it did happen again. If they come back to get them again, they don't really have any understanding of what to do about that. So it's just this sort of confusing fear. They feel very isolated by the experience. They feel in isolation because they can't talk to anybody about this because it's so weird that nobody's really going to believe them. We are wearing different outfits because we started shooting this episode
and decided we didn't like our outfits.
Yeah, outfits were bad. I looked
We
like
thought,
an Uggo.
this feels like a greener episode than we're doing here. Let's go put on some green.
Exactly. So we started shooting it 3 or 4 weeks ago and have had a lot of scheduling problems since. So, let's pick up where we left off.
And it was my fault. We won't go into why it happened, but it was my fault.
It was everybody's fault at some point. It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that John Mack points out about the people that go through the abduction phenomenon, he said there are 4 dimensions that are characteristic of almost everybody that goes through this. One being the rape-like experience of it. What happens to these people is very similar, often involves genitals, so it's very similar to rape in that there is something very invasive being done to them, and it's done very much against their will. They have a fear of recurrence, a fear that this could happen to them again at any point, and there's not really anything that they could do about it because they can control your mind or whatever. There is the isolating feeling that they have, that nobody really understands it, and if you tried to explain it to somebody, they would most likely think that this didn't happen the way the way you're saying it happened. And all of that compounds with the fact that it's a huge reality shock. The fact that they have to accept that the world involves aliens, but they have to kind of accept that alone. And so they're dealing with this huge shock, ontological shock, I guess you'd say, of this new understanding of the world, and nobody believes you, and it doesn't make sense to anybody else.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if ontological would be the right word too, but I would think of it as a cosmological shock. Because I feel like what you're saying is not only have they experienced a trauma, but one that doesn't even fit into their paradigm. So their paradigm and their trust in life is breaking.
Right. Yeah. Because they clearly have a big misunderstanding about how the world works.
Yeah.
Yeah. In order to figure out what's been going on with these people, Mack used hypnotic regression to get them back to a state of mind, or to take them back to that moment in a different state of mind so that they could communicate what exactly was going on. And wanted to touch on what that process was and how he did that. He used a lot of breath work that was founded by Stan Groff, who we've talked about because of his book, Spiritual Emergency, the essays that he wrote in that. He didn't go into great detail on what the breath work is in particular, but if you're interested in that, it sounds like Groff would be the place to look.
It would be holotropic breath work would be what you would look up.
Okay, cool. When he put people under hypnosis to figure out what happened with the abduction, he remarks that it's unusually easy to do it to them. These people go under hypnosis much more easily than most people that he puts under hypnosis. And I have a couple speculations about that we'll get to. But that's an interesting point, that they're easier than usual. One of the things that he had people do as a way to make the process more comfortable and less frightening for them, because when they're going through this, when they're being hypnotically regressed so that they're in that moment, it feels a lot like going through it for the first time, because they don't remember it, so they're now experiencing it for the first time that they're going to remember. And so a lot of times going through those scary experiences that they've already been through, now is when they're really getting scared. Now is when they really freak out. One thing that he would use, a tool that he would use to make it more comfortable, is to tell them For example, if somebody is in their regression, they're standing at the bottom of a stairwell that's going to go up into a ship, and they're supposed to walk up into the ship, and they know on some level that they do walk up into that ship. They get up in there, but they don't remember how it happened exactly or what was immediately in the area. What he'll have them do is tell them to separate a part of you, create a clone of yourself that acts on your behalf and that acts as like a drone for you to go up and do what you actually did and to report back to you what happened. Like, you don't have to look all the way directly at what happened. Instead, you can send some aspect of yourself up into the ship to report back. That's just an interesting... I haven't studied hypnotic regression a lot, but I thought that was a very interesting method to have them split off part of their personality to experience it first before they were more comfortable, more fully experiencing it with their whole mind. Mm-hmm. And something that was interesting about the hypnotic regression is that it often would end up leading to people having past life experiences where he didn't mean to be taking them to a past life. He was trying to take them to the point where they were abducted in this lifetime. But sometimes that inadvertently leads to them having experiences of remembering times in past lives where they had other connections with the souls that are associated with their abductors, or other experiences with abductions in past lives, as though this is something that has happened to them over the course of several lifetimes.
Do you know, so when, like, I got a hypnosis session the other day, and their, like, guiding phrase was, now go to that in you which has your highest good as its sole intent. Do you know what their kind of leading tagline was? Was it, now go to a place where you were abducted by aliens? Or was it, now go back to that point when this and this happened? Like,
it seems like it was different based on each patient that he was working with. With some of them, they had a specific instance in mind. Like, I remember that I had missing time this one day that I was at this party. So I want to go back to the moment before that missing time started. And so sometimes it will have that sort of goal in mind, and it doesn't necessarily lead there. Sometimes they'll be led elsewhere that they didn't mean to, but sometimes it was being approached that way. But then it sounds like sometimes he was doing it in a more open way. I remember with one of the cases he mentioned that, like, he put them into hypnotic regression, and I can't remember the phrasing of it, but it was much vaguer. Like, you'll see what you see, we'll go from there. Like, whatever your subconscious feels like it needs to show us, we'll do that. It seems like it typically started with a specific point in mind, but sometimes was vaguer.
Okay.
Yeah. To describe the beings themselves that are doing the abductions, most of them would be what we call the grays or the short grays. So they are the most common thing that you would see in drawings or portrayals, the same thing that you would see in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or was it Chariots of Fire? That's another abduction one. But they're short. They're about 4 feet tall. They're humanoid like us. They have 2 arms and 2 legs, but they're very weak, scrawny. Their bodies are light and thin. Their legs are spindly and like weak looking. They don't look physically strong at all. Their heads, although they're shorter than us, their heads are quite a bit bigger than us. They protrude out the back. Their eyes are much bigger than ours and are just black. There are a few cases where people reference the idea that they think that their eyes are not their eyes, and that their eyes are sort of like sunglasses over eyes that are within, as though maybe the gray exterior could be a suit over something else, although it could be that is the case in some, but not in others. They have small mouths, small noses, basically no nose, just 2 nostril holes. The same goes for the ears. No real ears, just sort of holes where that would be, if that's even seen at all. There are others that sort of diverged from that a little bit. There were references to ones that are a little bit taller than that, ones that are closer to our height. Something that was pretty commonly described is the idea that there would be in the sort of operating rooms that they're taken to, the person that would be in charge was a taller one that was about 5 feet tall, whereas the rest of them were about 4 feet tall. So there might be like a taller leader that looks very similar to the rest of them. There are some that were described by other people that weren't traditional Greys, were reptilian-looking creatures, big, strong lizard men, mantis-looking things that looked like big mantises with the claws that they have, or ants were described as well. Seems like insects in general get described. There was references to ones that were wrinkly and brown. It sounds like they look very similar to E.T. from that movie. And one that was described as being like a skull in a bubble, which I've seen. I think there was a show called Butt Ugly Martians, which is like basically like that. Like they look like skeletal skulls, but they're sort of in a bubble of some kind.
Like a transparent skin?
Yeah. Like transparent skin that is over it and sort of much rounder than the skull that's underneath.
Wow.
Almost everybody refers to the fact that their eyes have power. Like looking in their eyes gives them more control over the person. They seem to have a lot of technology that is related to either reducing emotion or reducing fear or just calming you down. And it seems like some of that tech is just in their body, which I guess you could say is not necessarily tech or just something psychic that is a part of them. But by looking into their eyes, they're able to take more control over the people that are being abducted. They're also often referenced having wands or other kinds of tools that they like point at people or touch on people in order to reduce their fear. Yeah. I thought this was just an interesting point. There were 6 names that were given for that 6 names that people said they were told by the people that abducted them. So I thought that was interesting. Agika, Mulana, Tanun, Mengus, Valia, and Orion of the Obasai people. Those are some of the names they gave. The abductions, when they happen, there's typical ways that they occur. Almost always people end up having missing time. Like they're gone, but they don't remember what they were actually doing during that time. And a lot of that's because they were asleep, or it feels less weird to them at the time because I was asleep. So it's possible that this was just a dream or whatever. But missing time is very frequent. When the abductions start, a lot of times it will start because somebody is sleeping and they just show up in the room and there's a shadow in the room, or there's things standing over the bed, or there's something that's seen outside of the window, or something in the closet. And then the person will have sleep paralysis and then stop remembering what happened. That's frequently a part of it. They seem to be able to paralyze people either with their minds or with the technology that they carry.
So it's not that they have sleep paralysis and then experience being abducted. It's that they have sleep paralysis and then lose memory.
Well, sometimes some people remember more of it than others.
Yeah.
But it's often that people see them in the room and have sleep paralysis while they see them in the room. And then either they remember or they don't, but usually they do not. Usually they don't remember fully the experience. Something is wiped. Yeah.
Eerie, because it reminds me of the story that you told when you were in the tent.
Yeah. I guess just to share that briefly, I was camping and was with Sarah, my girlfriend, and our 2 dogs, and I was in the tent and I woke up and I didn't see anyone as far as I remember, but I just felt paralyzed. I couldn't move and I was like, oh shit, this is sleep paralysis. I thought in my head, and then thought I can't move. I can't move at all. And then I thought wait, yes, I can. And I lifted my arm, and then I just stopped remembering. I just fell immediately right back to sleep. But
That's
I
pretty
felt
weird.
for a moment that I couldn't move. And then I moved, and then I didn't remember anything.
Yeah.
And then the next day, one of our dogs was very freaked out and was behaving strangely. So don't make a ton of it, but it could be something. Like,
Yeah.
we were in the forest, so that makes the...
Hadn't you also spotted a UFO that day?
Oh, that's... Yeah, I forgot that.
Pretty important part of the
I didn't
story.
even mention that when I was talking about it yesterday. But yeah, earlier that night, Sarah and I had been looking up and had seen what was a very bright light that was moving around in not a straight line in different directions. And then 3 or 4 littler balls split off of it and went in different directions. That's very weird.
Right.
I can't think of any explanation for that makes sense. And
Right.
that's a pretty common report that people say about UFOs, like a ball of light that other balls of light split off of.
Right. And then just to give another detail against the likelihood of it being an abduction, the dog could have been scared because the dog was attacked that day. So
True.
there are reasons to doubt it, and there are reasons to think it could have happened. But just interesting.
It's interesting, and I would entertain doing hypnotic regression at some point, but
Yeah.
haven't done that and haven't had any experiences like it since then. People will often feel an unexplained urge to go for a walk or to go for a drive or to take a turn that they wouldn't usually take. Like, it's often in these cases, people will say, like, I don't really know why, but I just decided to go for a drive off in this direction that I don't usually go. Or sometimes people will feel that they just got a message in their head saying to go outside. And then they decided to go outside. They just followed some whim that popped into their head,
Right.
which could very well be planted in their head. Like, that seems to be the most likely conclusion, that they're capable of putting a thought into your head to bait you into a situation where you'd be easier to snag. People will sometimes hear a buzzing or humming sound in their room or wherever they are before it happens. People will often be floated. That's like the word that most commonly gets used for it, floated out of the room that they're in, and they'll pass through walls or pass through solid objects, and they feel like a strange vibration as they go through it, but they're able to be passed through walls and stuff with the tractor beams that are being put on them. Like, there is some sort of technology that they have to take them from their room to the ship, straight through a window, straight through a wall. It doesn't matter.
Some of the stuff that my fiance is studying has said that you can sometimes just have your astral body abducted, but not your physical body. Did this book mention anything like that?
I think he doesn't really entertain. I don't know that Mack would talk about something like the astral body. Or the idea of like astral projection or separating from it. But there is reference to people feeling like they're not necessarily sure if this was happening physically or not. Like, if this was something psychic that was happening. Mack seems to entertain the possibility that they are being brought to a separate plane, that they're being brought to like another dimension that's parallel to ours. And so maybe they're being taken out of this plane. And I think it's possible that it's not the body being taken and that they're just taking some sort of essence, the astral body, from you and taking it and then putting it back. But there are certainly cases where the person is genuinely missing and people didn't know where they were.
Right.
So he entertains it, but it doesn't seem like there's strong evidence based on this book.
Cool.
But it's very possible that does happen a lot. They'll often be brought through a port into the ship. Like, there'll be a hole on the side, just a door that opens up, and they'll be brought into the ship. And when they're brought into the ship, they describe that they're first brought into like an entryway where they are set down and the door gets closed, and then they're brought into the other rooms of the ship. A lot of times they reference being brought onto this ship and then brought up much higher into the sky away from Earth to a mothership, which is where a lot of the operations actually happen. They don't all report that, but there's enough that it seems to be often likely true.
Yeah.
The people that are brought are people of all ages. They're like these abductions. People that go through abductions tend to be people that have gone through abductions their whole life. So it'll start from when they're little kids to sort of, I think, to acclimate them to the experience and to make this more comfortable as it goes further. Because as they get older, it becomes a more invasive sexual thing that's going on. So they're brought there as kids and are made comfortable. It's often like a play date when children are there. Like they'll be brought up to the ship and they'll be told to play with other children. Sometimes that's other children that are abductees, but sometimes that's children that are alien children or children that are a hybrid of human and alien, which we'll get to. When the people are older, I think I may have mentioned this earlier, but it is more women, it seems like, that get abducted than men. And that seems to be because a lot of what they're doing is about creating hybrid children of humans and whatever race they are. So when the women are brought up, they'll often be brought into, the women and the men will be brought into some sort of operating room. Usually it's private. Usually they're the only human subject in the room. Sometimes there is the male or female that they're being combined with in the room with them as well. Sometimes they're brought into big group operating rooms. Like there was a description of one person saying that they were in a huge room with hundreds of beds in it. And there was just abductees all over the place that were getting worked on. But it's usually a more private, very similar to our operating rooms situation.
Right.
They're set in a chair, and people often refer to like this chair being like weirdly comfortable. Like it's made of metal, but it doesn't feel cold, and it feels like it just shapes perfectly to their body, and it can kind of be shifted into a bed or a table, much like beds that we have, but it's like perfectly conforming to your body, so it perfectly distributes weight or something like that. People remark a lot that it's a very comfortable chair/bed that they're put on. The men, when they're brought up, it's almost always about getting semen. It's about getting sperm out of them. So that'll be done with, it's usually some sort of sucking thing, just a machine that gets put on the penis and some sort of electrical nodes that get put on the testicles, and they get stimulated in some way so that they can get the semen, so that they can use that for experiments going forward. There is a couple references to hot aliens being used.
That's so funny.
Yeah, like just sexy hybrids or sexy grays, and they're there to entice them and to make them comfortable with it. And like there was one story of he was like a teenage boy who was going through this, and so for him it was really exciting and awesome. Like he wasn't uncomfortable at all. Like this is just, I get to fuck. Like he was just stoked about it.
So they actually did intercourse and then pulled out and had them ejaculate into a cup or what?
Yeah. Yeah. Like they do. God, I can't remember exactly the act that she did, but she did something. But then in the end, it's got to go into the machine, not into her.
Right.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
So that's generally what gets done with the men. And so it's a less time-consuming thing. They don't have to be brought there as often just for sample collection. That's all that they need to be there for. The women seem to be brought up more often, and like more women seem to be brought there, and the women that get brought there seem to be brought there more often than the men do. The abductors put babies into the women. They're not just combining the male semen with her egg. They're taking eggs from her in some cases, doing stuff with it, doing their thing with it, combining it with whatever semen they want to use and doing whatever gene manipulation, gene editing that they do on top of that. So what gets put in the woman could be all kinds of levels of different things, because there's the variability of it may not even be her eggs. We don't know whose semen is necessarily used, whether that is just a straight human or whether that is a hybrid or whether it's a gray or whatever other race it is. There's the possibility that they could do all kinds of editing on top of that. So like changing specific pieces of DNA, editing very specific aspects of the DNA strain, just like the, what's the technology that we have?
Splicing?
Jurassic Park. That thing that we have, it's called like something, but it's like... We have some sort of technology here on Earth that's being used to do gene editing.
It's like a capital letter at the end of a word.
Yeah, it's like it ends with an R, but it should end with an ER.
Yeah.
But
could you look up gene and then just put in a capital R? CRISPR.
Yep, that's it.
I thought
CRISPR. So they're doing some sort of crisping type of thing. And who knows what else they could be doing. But they put this fetus or this fertilized egg into women, and they will often have it grow in them and then bring them up again and take it out. There are references to the fact that like women will get pregnant, believe correctly that they're pregnant for months, and then they'll be brought back up to the ship. The baby will be taken out of them, and they'll be told, oh, I guess you were never pregnant, because it doesn't make any sense that it could have just disappeared out of you.
Yeah.
So they seem to be taking the babies in some cases and potentially doing who knows what else with it. There's like so many ways to speculate about like what all they could be doing, because we don't understand what technology they have exactly. But they are sometimes letting the baby grow to... like letting the baby be born the natural way. They're implanting women with the hybrid children that they've created and will have them give birth, and then that child will end up being someone who's abducted throughout their experience as well. Through this process, through the hypnotic regression, oftentimes the people that are abductees will find that they are not just human and that they were someone who is already a hybrid, or someone who was sent as an envoy, as an avatar of one of them down to Earth in a human body. So the body that they're in may be fully human, but their soul is someone who was of that alien race. And they claim to have soul-based technology to move souls from one body to another. So a lot of times after doing all the hypnotic regression, these people will come to believe, no, I'm not an abductee. I'm a part of this. Like, I'm a part of this program. And in order to do my job right, I had to not remember that I'm a part of this program. But I agreed to this deal. And then in the end feel more comfortable with the whole thing. Like, this is not something that's happening to me. This is something that we're doing together. I'm a part of that team. Sometimes the hybrids will be taken out of the women and will be raised in test tubes, basically. Will be raised in a system that they have there on the ship, and they'll be born, they'll be created mostly in a tube, mostly in a very sterile environment. There was one woman that referenced being brought into a room where she saw basically like a wall of aliens that were hybrid children that were kept in these sort of cases on the wall. And I'll get the picture so we can have it up on the screen here too. But they're often shown hybrid children. Where it gets really weird is that sometimes these people will be brought up onto the ship and they'll be asked to play with a kid. And they'll be told, like, this is your kid. So they'll be asked to play with their hybrid child. They'll be told to like love this child. They'll be handed a baby and be told like, this is your gray human baby and we need you to love it, which is a very interesting thing, that like there is something that they understand, that there is something very necessary about a parent's love to the development of the child, or at least that they're experimenting with the idea that there is something important about a parent's love for their child that they cannot provide.
I'm kind of curious. This is a far out speculation, but I'm curious whether the presence of the mother and the mother's love allows them to somehow take a snapshot of that resonance and then continually feed it to that baby in an artificial way.
That could be. Like it could be that they can understand the frequency of that emotion or something like that, and that they have some sort of way to replicate that frequency so that they could give that sort of love to the children. What does seem to be close to the core of what they're doing, at least if we believe what they're saying, is that they feel that we are like a hyper-emotional species, and that our emotion, although valuable in some ways, is dangerous, and that we're going to ruin the world because we're overly emotional. And so what they're doing is attempting to hybridize with us because they think that there could be some sort of more logical race that retains much of our emotion. And so they're trying to find some sort of happy medium between us and them. So they certainly see value in the emotion that we have, even though they don't hold it themselves.
Right.
And that seems to be like the children I mentioned earlier, that like children will often be told to play with the other hybrid babies that are up there. And I didn't mention that another thing that was said is that sometimes the children that are being abducted, who are very likely abductees themselves, or who are very likely hybrids themselves, will be given psychic testing. Like they'll be told to use this device that will amplify your psychic ability, and they do an experiment where they use this wand that's supposed to heighten their psychic ability or amplify it. I guess just like a wizard's wand, basically. And they point it at a ball to float it around the room to like test themselves against other kids. There was a story of like one little girl being in a room with like 10 other older kids, and then the teacher alien that was there having to tell her like, okay, that's enough. Like you're embarrassing the other children. You did a really good job though. And like her getting like hate from the other kids because she was the most psychic, but feeling very special about it. Like they have these whole experiences where they're playing with other kids. So as people go through the hypnotic regression, they come to understand more and more about the motivations of the abductors and what their ultimate goals are for us. And it seems to be kind of twofold. I think the hybridization aspect is the biggest part, that they want to combine with us because they feel they can make a better race than either of us if they combine with us. So although it might be not a good thing to be doing, ultimately they have good in mind. So they feel okay about what they're doing because they're trying to save us from ourselves. And what they're trying to save us from ourselves, what they're trying to save us from doing to ourselves, is essentially apocalypse. The people that are abducted are often given visions of apocalypse. I'm going to read this section here. Scenes of the earth devastated by a nuclear holocaust, vast panoramas of lifeless, polluted landscapes and waters, and apocalyptic images of giant earthquakes, firestorms, floods, and even fractures of the planet itself are shown by the aliens. These are powerfully disturbing to the abductees, who tend to experience them as literally predictive of the future of the planet. Some abductees are given assignments in this future holocaust as it is displayed, such as to feed the survivors, or are told, as in the prophetic books of the Bible, that some will perish while others will be taken to another place to participate in the evolution of life in the universe. So they're given a lot of visions about apocalypse, and the aliens will tell them that while they hope that they can correct our course so that we don't end up ending the world the way they expect us to end the world. They do have a plan B, even if we do mess this up and we don't do it right and we end the world. They're making a backup of us, basically. They've got our DNA saved, and so they're making a race that they can replace us with after we're gone. Like if we do kill ourselves, then they'll fix the planet, put it back together, and then they'll put new people down.
That makes so much sense.
So they're hoping to fix us now, but if not, we've got a backup, and that's what we want to do.
Right.
And that they say that there will be, although they think there might be some traditional humans that survive, they'll be led by these new hybrids that are put down on the earth.
That's wild.
Which is very interesting in the way that it ties in with like ideas of
Atlantis.
Yeah, and like Graham Hancock's ideas of the ancient magicians that taught us civilization after the last great catastrophe in, what was like 12,000 years ago, something like that. So it does ring true with a lot of that. Although it is possible that could be a lie that they're telling based on truth and history that we have. So it could potentially be a lie that just fits with our history, and that makes it a good lie because it's plausible. But that's what they say they're doing.
Wow. Cool.
And even the children are shown these apocalyptic visions. And what's very strange is like how much in the end, almost all the abductees, according to Mack, after they've gone through the whole process, they feel less angry about the whole thing. They feel almost universally warmer towards their abductors than they started out. Like it's almost always they're coming into this with fear and with like concern about what's happening to them. But by the end, they feel more comfortable like, oh, this is good. I'm doing something. Either because they feel that they were always part of it, or because they feel that they are special and were selected to do a very important mission on the earth. And that makes them feel good about the whole thing.
Yeah.
Other information that they're given, they're often told to talk very carefully if they are going to speak about this, that they need to be very careful because a lot of people aren't going to be able to handle the information that we're giving you. Chi is often explained to them, like they're told about the energies in their body and like the possibilities of that. People that weren't necessarily open to it get told about it. And I mentioned earlier, there was one person who was brought up who was specifically one of the cases that was talked about here was someone who was a Qi manipulator, someone who had been doing Qigong. And so it makes sense that they're aware of that. They're told a lot about nature and just about how there is a balance on the planet and that we're messing it up. And one thing that was just a small thing that I thought was interesting is sometimes they're told about dinosaurs. And actually, I think this was only one person who was the source of this. But they were told that there was once a very intelligent race of large reptilian creatures that lived here. And that basically they explained that the dinosaurs used to live here, but that they were very intelligent and that they had communication with the dinosaurs, but the dinosaurs fucked up the planet the same way we might. Like the dinosaurs were one incarnation of intelligent people that were living on the planet. I don't know how seriously that should be taken. It did strike me as interesting because that was the plot of like a recent Rick and Morty episode, that the dinosaurs were actually super intelligent and they just left and then they came back and are like talking super intelligently.
Yeah. Well, there in Robert Monroe's books, Robert Monroe was an audio researcher who spontaneously had out-of-body experiences, learned how to recreate them, trained the government in recreating them. And the evidence of this can be read if you Google U.S. Army Gateway Report Assessment. So that's Robert Monroe. He still runs an institute teaching what he's learned. Well, he's dead, but his institute still exists. He wrote a trilogy of books, And in his journeys out of the body, talking to intelligent species from elsewhere and whatnot, seeking God through his adventures, he learned that on different planets, different races of animal reach the pinnacle, become the apex of evolution. And we are an example of monkeys or apes or primates or whatever the technical term is, becoming the apex of the planet. And this is alluded to in the Quran, which says that the angels, I believe it was the angels, some heavenly beings of some kind went to, or God maybe, went to all of the animal kingdoms and asked, do you want to take on the burden of being fully conscious? Do you want to carry the responsibility of integrating the consciousness of the planet on your shoulders? And they all said no. And then they got to the primates and they said yes, and they agreed and became humans. And then now here we are. And so when I hear that some of them are reptilian and some of them are praying mantises, it just makes me think, well, okay, in that course of events, it wasn't the primates that won the race. It was one of those other races that won the race.
That's interesting, yeah. There's a few sections that I want to share from the book itself before I get into kind of speculation and I guess what I think of the whole thing. Vallée, now he's referencing Jacques Vallée, who wrote The Invisible College and many other books. He's one of the, if there was a Mount Rushmore of ufology, he's certainly on it.
Yeah, NASA engineer too.
True, yeah. Vallée draws many analogies to the worldwide sightings of non-human, shape-shifting, airily adept beings throughout history. These beings appear to mankind in thousands of different guises. They possess extraordinary powers and frequently aim to partake of and or take away something belonging to humans, desiring to communicate with or simply play with tricks on them. He concludes the UFO occupants, like the elves of old, are not extraterrestrials. They are denizens of another reality. Vallée believes that abductees' interaction with aliens is part of an age-old and worldwide myth that has shaped our belief structures, our scientific expectations, and our view of ourselves. He writes, the same power attributed to saucer people was once the exclusive property of fairies. Vallée draws parallels between religious apparitions, the fairy faith, the report of dwarf-like beings with supernatural powers, the airship tales in the United States in the last century, and the present stories of UFO landings. He speculates broadly, and this is now a quote from Vallée, or should we hypothesize that an advanced race somewhere in the universe and sometime in the future has been showing us three-dimensional space operas for the last 2,000 years in an attempt to guide our civilization? If so, do they deserve our congratulations? Are we dealing instead with a parallel universe, another dimension where there are human races living and where we may go at our expense never to return to the present? Are these races only semi-human, so that in order to maintain contact with us, they need crossbreeding with men and women of our planet? Is this the origin of the many tales and legends where genetics play a great role? The symbolism of the Virgin in occultism and religion? The fairy tales involving human midwives and changelings? The sexual overtones of the flying saucer reports? The biblical stories of intermarriage between the Lord's angels and terrestrial women whose offspring were giants? From that mysterious universe, are higher beings projecting objects that can materialize and dematerialize at will? Are the UFOs windows rather than objects? There's nothing to support these assumptions, and yet in view of the historical continuity of the phenomenon, alternatives are hard to find, unless we deny the reality of all the facts, as our peace of mind would indeed prefer. So he's alluding here to I think the main point there is that he's entertaining the possibility that the aliens, as it were, are more like spirits that can take some form here and come from another plane, and they've always been around, but the aliens and the UFOs are sort of a rebrand of the fairies and the jinn and the spirits of all cultures, because it makes more sense to us in the modern times, because it's spaceships from other planets, and now we're open to that, so that feels less weird, than the idea of something from another realm, some spirit from another realm entering this one. It's just easier to understand that. And it's also possible that it could be some column A, some column B, that some of it is real aliens from other planets, and that some of it is spirits taking this form.
Yeah.
There is considerable debate among investigators of the abduction phenomenon about whether, given the harsh and often terrorizing methods the aliens employ, the intelligence at work might be evil or mean us harm. Obviously, in considering this question, one enters a realm of interpretation that goes beyond the available evidence. We have only sketchy knowledge, for example, of what the hybrid program, which seems to lie at the center of the abduction phenomenon, is really about. Yet my overall impression is that the abduction process is not evil, and that the intelligence at work do not wish us ill. Rather, I have the sense, might I say faith, that the abduction phenomenon is, at its core, about the preservation of life on Earth at a time when the planet's life is profoundly threatened. And that's on the last page of the book that Mack says that. And then one more section that I want to read here. We can continue to try to make the phenomenon fit the world as we have known it, jamming it into a kind of Procrustean bed of consensus reality. Or we can acknowledge that the world might be other than we have known it. Then we are free to see where our thinking leads us. I cannot discourage those who try to discover conventional explanations for the abduction phenomenon. I would only point out that as a clinician, I have spent countless hours trying to find alternate explanations that would not require the major shift in my worldview that I have had to face. But as I discussed in Chapter 2, and as I have tried to make clear in the case narratives, no familiar theory or explanation has come even close to accounting for the basic features of the abduction phenomenon. In short, it is what it is, though the ultimate source of these experiences remains a mystery. So, Mack's conclusion in the end seems to be that he feels it's not all a bad thing, that like they seem to have good intentions. I don't feel as convinced as he does about that. And when I first covered this book, when we did it on night school, I left it feeling like, oh shit, these are kind of good guys. Like they're trying to help save the world. Because on some level, I do feel like we are in danger of blowing the world up. I think there's a lot of ways that we could potentially do that. And it's nice to think that there's someone here who's trying to stop us from doing that. But then I can't help but wonder, like, even if they're telling the truth, is that they're right? Like, isn't it our planet? And like, if we blow it up, shouldn't that kind of be up to us to do? Or if we ruin it, like, if it goes away, that should be kind of okay. But maybe they love us and maybe they don't want to see us fail. So they're here being our good space brothers to try and keep us on track. I can't help but feel really negative about the fact that they're kidnapping us. Like, it's hard not to call them rapists. Like, they're stealing us in the night. And I mean, yeah, they're raping us, like in unconscious states, doing that to us. And so I certainly, although I recognize that there is a possibility that if I had a bigger perspective of the world, I might think that what they're doing is ultimately good and is leading us to some sort of big cosmic unity or something like that. I, as a human, feel against them, feel like you guys should fuck off. Like, this is our planet, this is our people, and you don't have the right to steal us and edit us or change us. Because as it stands, they're trying to like infiltrate us. If this is to be believed, if these abductees and John Mack are to be believed, which I don't think, I do believe them, then that means that there are hybrids that live among us and that this has probably been going on for a long time and that what we consider human isn't necessarily just that, because we
Yeah.
don't know how far back this has been going on. So we don't know how mixed in our genetics are with different races. There is evidence that we are already a combination of Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Australopithecus, and a couple others like Denisovans. There's a lot of different like human races that make up what we now call Homo sapien sapien, which is what we are. So maybe those things could be aliens. Maybe that is like evidence that we were always a bunch of different races that have been coming here from different places and mixing together. But they are currently coming here and are currently taking our people. And I'm definitely against that as a human, but I may have too small a perspective. So I left the first time we covered this book feeling positive towards them, but I don't feel that at all now. I feel that they need to stop unless you agree to it, unless you want to be abducted, unless you really consent to it and understand what's going on. Like, it's not cool.
Yeah.
I think something that I find interesting about the fact that the hypnosis process is extra easy is, like, what if that is by their design? Like, they may want this information to be known. They may want these people to go through the hypnotic regression process. They may be, because they have some way of burying memories so that we don't have access to them. But they could be deliberately burying them in a very shallow way, like just throwing a little bit of dirt over it, because they want you to find out this information, because they want these people to ultimately wake up and go like, I remember now, this was the plan. I was supposed to do this. This is my mission. And I'm glad now that I understand it. And maybe that's because it's best for people to come to this understanding in a gradual way, because then it's not so shocking as it would be if they remembered all the abductions immediately. They wouldn't agree to it then. But if we can do this over the course of 40 years of your life, and then you can later try and go back through it and figure it out, then you can tolerate it because you're doing it in amounts that you can handle at the time. So it may be good intentioned, but it's also possible that there's sort of that it's sort of a limited hangout process. Limited hangout, I think, is a term that intelligence agencies use, but it's basically like, if you don't want people to know the truth, you make up a little bit, like if there's a big conspiracy going on to cover up aliens on the planet, give them a little bit. So admit like, all right, you guys were right. Roswell did happen. You got us. And then you're doing a limited hangout to hide the fact that like, and they're here every day and they live among us and there's a million, like UFOs are here constantly every day. But instead they say, we'll throw them a bone. And then people go, look, we're vindicated. We got it right. Yep, we knew it. We knew you were lying about Roswell. We got it now. Let's go home.
Yeah.
So it could be that they're doing something like that, where they're basically burying really, really deep the truth. But then they have a narrative that makes people feel comfortable. This narrative that like, no, you're an alien and you agreed to this. And now you remember it all. Isn't that great? Now you know the truth. You were special and you're on this planet for your special mission.
Do you remember the name of the author that we were reading the transcripts from yesterday?
No.
Me neither. But the book is called Gifts from the Stars. In one of those transcripts, which are conversations that she has with extraterrestrials and records, asking questions that would be relevant to all of humanity about Jesus and science and the future and shit. Elena Dannon.
Sounds right, yeah.
Thanks, Evan. She was asking whether it was the case that people who are abducted choose ahead of time to be abducted, like it's part of their life path to be abducted, and the extraterrestrial that she was talking with got very, very irritated at that question. Was like, God, yes, technically once in a while it is true that you can choose a life path that would include connecting two different planets or species, and that would include getting abducted, yes, but that does not mean that you can just excuse any abduction by saying that if it's happening to you, you must have agreed to it ahead of time. And I wonder if that irritated that extraterrestrial that Elena was talking with so much, because it is a narrative that they use as a cover to do things that are wrong. Because
maybe
I am skeptical of the Greys. There's other races that I'm more warm towards. I'm skeptical of the Greys. They look like a bad path. Like, I don't want that to be my future. There's extraterrestrials that are beautiful, radiant, glowing. They just look like humans, but much more extraordinary.
Right, like Tolkien elves.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's some that are like beautiful blue Hindu god-looking people.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful future. Love that. I don't want to be a Grey in the future.
Yeah.
Whenever you have multiple mentors speaking into your life, every single one of them is trying to shape you into themselves. So you have to look at each of those people and go, do I want to be like that guy? Am I going to listen to that guy? Same thing with races, with alien races. We as humanity need to look at these races and say, do we want to be like that? Do we want to be like that? We don't want to be Greys. We don't want to be hideous, ugly, gray, genderless little weaklings. There's obviously abilities they have that we don't, but they don't appear like ripe elements of nature. They appear like they went down some kind of weird, that looks like a Bill Gates future. That looks like a weird, technocratic, autistic, freaky, unnatural turn.
Yeah.
And I don't want that.
There does seem to be a reference. There does seem to be some references to the idea that they were once more like us, more emotional, and that they have developed into what they are now, but they feel they've gone too far. And so they want to dial it back by hybridizing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, because of who they are, and me not wanting that to be our future as humanity, I want us to be beautiful and natural and radiant and strong physically, mentally, spiritually. I don't want us to be these wrinkly little dorks.
I don't want to give up emotion.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I don't dig that. And that makes me skeptical of them. And so if they are A, an ugly future, and B, interacting with us unconsensually without our permission.
Yeah.
That was redundant, but then I agree. I'm skeptical. And
Yeah.
there are those blue people and beautiful elf people and those other races, I don't know the names of them, but that interact with high vibrational people willingly. They speak with them and say, hey, we're interested in guiding humanity. You want to have a conversation? Because you meditate and you're vegan and you're doing everything right and you're vibrating high and you want the best for the world. And because you're on a vibration high enough that we can access you and have a conversation, just like if you behave very maturely as a high school student, you're like homies with the teachers. If you're a little shit as a high school student, the teachers can't level with you. You're not on a high enough vibration for them to talk to you like an adult. Well, same thing with humans. If you want to talk to these greater races, you have to be on a higher vibration so that they can look at you and be like, all right, I can talk to you. You're reasonable. And those conversations are consensual, and they're intentionally about saying that many of these positive races, all, as far as I know, are affiliated with the Galactic Federation, which is like this galactic scale UN that is overseeing humanity, but only willingly. And the Galactic Federation has rules against intervening in human affairs against their wishes, but will communicate with humans and will, especially when humans astral project and contact them, they'll talk to them. It's like, hey, you showed up you showed up here. Like, yeah, I'll talk to you. Go back home with this. And that to me looks like positive mentors who are not stepping into our lives, but are assisting us. So I agree. I'm skeptical about if you're kidnapping us and raping us and our interactions aren't consensual, then no. Yeah, I don't want anything to do with you either. And if these beings are intervening in human affairs without us asking, they're violating the galactic order. They're violating the Galactic Federation.
Yeah.
And they probably don't have our best interest in mind.
It's interesting that like, I don't know much about the Galactic Federation. I haven't read about that much, but it's very similar to the Star Trek idea. The Federation, whatever, the Galactic Federation that all the characters of Star Trek are a part of do have a rule that you don't interact with the evolution of the people. Like, you watch these people from afar, you can visit these planets, but you don't try to guide them. You don't start like getting mixed up with them and trying to make them something they're not, or try to stop them from killing themselves if they kill themselves. I can't remember the term for it, but that's The prime directive. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that's very similar to that idea.
Yeah.
And these people, the fact that the abductees that the people that interact with the abductors, the abductees, the fact that they in the end come to believe that this is actually good is often like not really that trustworthy of an opinion, because you would think that it turns out you're one of them. Like you're part of the club that's here to rape the earth and do whatever you want with us. So yeah, you think it's good because it turns out you're a part of it. And now you remember that you're a part of it. So now I can't really trust you either because it turns out you're with them.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I feel negative towards anybody abducting anybody without their permission. I think that's whack. That's not okay. As far as like advice about how to deal with them, if you were going through this experience, Mack doesn't go into that a lot because in the end, Mack's opinion seems to be positive and that like you should just kind of relax and let it happen.
Yeah, because he wants to justify his own research.
Yeah, yeah. And he feels that his conclusion is that in the end, if you interact with them with less fear, if you accept this more, then they'll be like willing to give you more information. And so you should just sort of accept it and go along with the program because ultimately everybody seems to think it's a good thing, but that could just be because they're a part of them or because sometimes people are very susceptible to being told that they're especially special and that they have a very important mission, whereas nobody else has an important mission.
Right.
Yeah. But I don't...
Briefly, my opinion on what to do if you are violated against your will in one of these situations is that there is a magic in evoking cosmic order because everybody is made of the cosmos and everybody is subject to natural law. And everybody can temporarily, in the short term, as it rebounds in their face terribly, violate natural law. But you can use word and intention to evoke natural law in a way that removes these creatures' ability to violate it. And so if they're violating the galactic order by meddling when it's not welcomed, and you say, in the name of Jesus Christ, you cannot touch me, that is a word and an intention that to our culture is our linguistic representation of the evocation of the cosmic order and can instantaneously prevent demonic or extraterrestrial intervention from happening.
Yeah.
For other cultures that aren't Christian, there may be a different answer, a different evocation of the same principle. But for us as Americans, that is your best bet, in my opinion.
I think that it's certainly worth trying, and I did have that written down. Mack doesn't mention Jesus or anything about that in this book, although anecdotally from other stories I've heard about people who have been through abductions, I have heard that helps, which could imply the possibility that these are demons or that they are just not aligned with God and that Jesus or Yahshua is.
Yeah.
So I think that potentially using that, especially if you're a religious person, try using that name. But if you're an American, do it anyway. If you're anybody, worth a shot.
Yeah. If you're whatever culture that you're in, evoke the holiest name that you have. Yeah. Because there is vibratory quality in that word in your psyche that carries the power to evoke cosmic order. Yeah. Whatever that is to you. For us, if that's Christ, that's our symbol, like it or not. You claim to be Christian or claim not to be whatever. That's our word for that. And so that's what we got. Yeah. I mean, you yell, in the name of natural law, you must stop. Try, but that might not be as sacred in your psyche deep down as the word Christ. And so... Yeah,
I guess if that's the most sacred thing you can think of, if it's as really as sacred as it gets to you, you can try it. Yeah.
That's not archetypal language, though, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like... There's a deeper archetypal dimension of the psyche where that power is really contained. Okay. And there are words that evoke that archetypal power. So your 20-year-old physicalist cosmology, which considers natural law more sacred than Christ, is not going to evoke something archetypal.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Because you're not
throwing a
necessarily
raindrop.
talking about your intention, but rather like a hard factual power that different words might have based on human society over time, not just about your words and what you think they mean.
Right. The power is contained in the collective consciousness.
Right.
So Christ, that's a very old idea.
Yeah.
And it's a particular iteration of an idea even more ancient than the Christ concept as we understand it, but it still is an ancient evocation of something even more ancient. And yeah, that is more powerful. I mean, you can, in the name of science, you can't do this. Give it a shot, man. But
sure.
The only two words that I've ever heard working are Jesus and Buddha when it comes to preventing an active kidnapping by an extraterrestrial.
Yeah. These things often, in hearing stories about any sort of negative entities, there is a through line of everything's wanting to kind of scare people, like that these things often present in ways that are meant to be scary. And I'm going pretty far out to speculate here, but I think that it's possible that these things, although they show up and when people are very afraid of them, they can reduce our fear. Like they can, the way these people feel about it is that they're just getting rid of the fear. They're able to just calm us down with the technology that they have. But what if it could be that what's going on here is that they're not getting rid of our fear or calming us down. They are eating it or they are taking it, like sucking it up in some way.
Interesting.
And so, like I'm saying...
That's why it vanishes.
Yeah. Like it could be that this is sort of the Monsters, Inc. thing where the monsters come out of the doors in the rooms to scare children in order to suck up their fear energy into machines to power all the machines in the monster world that they live in. It could be that they're doing something like that and that they can fuel off of our fear. And that's not something that he entertained at all, but it seems plausible to me that they are not they're not reducing our fear. They're not calming us down out of love because they don't want us to be uncomfortable. They're ramping our fear way up by sleep paralyzing us and showing up in the bedroom, freaking us out, and then taking that. And they could be doing something with that.
Interesting.
So don't be afraid. Like, do your best to not be afraid of them. It doesn't, at the very least, it's not helping you. According to Mack, if you are less afraid, they'll give you more information. I think that might be too warm an opinion towards them. But if I'm wrong, then he's right, and it's still a good thing not to be afraid. But try not to be afraid, because anyone that wants you to be afraid doesn't have your best interests at heart and might be benefiting from it in some way. In some cases, they seem to be afraid of us. Like, we make them uncomfortable because we are very emotional. We can fly into rages that they wouldn't fly into. And physically, they're very weak. Like, if you were to hit them, it's like, from the description, it sounds like they weigh 30, 40 pounds, something like that. Their bodies are very weak. They have very little muscle mass. And physically, like, they would stand no chance against most children. So, and it seems like they get uncomfortable when we get angry. In a couple of the stories in here, when we got angry, they could feel that the vibe was different and that, like, people were getting, the aliens that were in the room were getting uncomfortable at anger. I think if I was in this position, I think it's worth trying to get angry. If you can force yourself to be angry instead of afraid, that could potentially be more valuable.
That's interesting.
It's worth a thought, or it's worth a try. That's what, if I were to find myself abducted, I would try to keep in mind that these things are extremely physically weak and that I can kick their ass and that they're rapists and they don't belong on my planet. And I shouldn't be afraid of them because it's bad to be afraid of them. So that's my speculation on what to do about it. In addition to using the name of Jesus or using some other holy name, potentially holy symbolism in a room could help. or avoid being alone, because most abduction cases happen when someone is alone or gets led off to some other point. Like, I feel like just going for a walk out into this spot way out in the field, and then they get abducted there. So if you can avoid not being alone, especially outside, especially at night, you are less likely to be abducted if you fear. Because that kind of sounds bad, because I think people should be comfortable walking around and doing whatever. But if you're someone who's going through abductions on a regular basis, try to stay with people. This also kind of ties back to what is, you ever heard the term fairy-led?
No.
Like that's a Will of the Wisp. That's sort of a Scottish or Irish folklore thing, but like balls of light that will lead people off into the forest. I've heard stories from a friend of ours about like being in a vision, being like led off by some sort of gremlin off into the forest. There's lots of stories.
Yeah, trying to.
Yeah. Oftentimes when people get abducted, they are led by something, either by a voice in their head or by a light or by some other entity off away from the group. So if you sleep with other people in the same room, or just don't be alone, like that makes you a lot safer.
Yeah.
And I think that's the best speculation I have for now as to how to try and avoid it. I don't like these guys, and I would try to avoid it if I felt it was happening to me.
Yeah.
Do you have any other speculation or questions or comments?
One speculation is for people who aren't religiously inclined but want protection. Maybe they could think of it as cosmic instead of holy symbolism, because the word holy is very tainted by specific kinds of ways of thinking about the cosmic that aren't necessarily productive. And
Sure.
But like the cross or the yin yang, these are cosmic symbols, not necessarily holy symbols in the sense of pure and virginal, because the cosmos are not pure and virginal. The cosmos are pure and virginal and every kind of dirty and diverse. It's all of that. God is all of that. In the apocryphal book, Thunder. What is it? Thunder something mind. I can't remember exactly the name of it. Thunder. Could you look up Thunder Mind Apocryphal? I can't remember the second word.
Doesn't sound familiar to
Thunder Immeasurable Mind. I think that's what it is. And God speaks. And this is a wisdom text from the Gnostic Christians, and it says, and holy wisdom, the feminine aspect of God is speaking, and says, "I am the virgin and the whore." And so, the word holy is not an integrated way to think of the divine, because it's only the virgin. It's not the whore. It's only unity. It's not diversity. It's only that which is untouched, not that which actually touches all. It touches everything. And so, kind of a tangent, but it just want to say that there is a cosmic law of oneness, and it is out of tune with the cosmic law of oneness to meddle with a species, and that is your authority, that you exist and are therefore fundamentally cosmic, and can therefore evoke the cosmic law of oneness, which states that it is impossible to, with integrity, meddle in the development of another organism or species. And that's what you're evoking, not something inherently religious, unless you mean religious in the term that I think is actually sincere, which is the religion is to connect you with the cosmos again.
Yeah.
Etymologically, that's what it means. And so wanted to say that. And
I think that's a good clarification to make. Yeah.
And I think that, I just think that since we are cosmic, they have no right to mess with us. It's only if we don't know that we're cosmic that they have any ability or right to screw with us, in my opinion. But that's speaking from intuition. I'm not sure.
I think that feels plausible. Yeah.
And besides that, I think that that if you're a young person who's trying to become a good adult, and you have people speaking into your life who aren't helpful, who you don't want to hear from, the antidote to that is to seek out mentors intentionally, to go to someone who's living the life that you want and say, hey, how do I have what you have? How do I have a healthy marriage? How do I have money? How do I have a valuable career? How do I have genuine faith? Whatever that person has that you want, go ask them how they got it and ask them to help you. And they will answer your questions without putting anything on you that you're not asking for if they're a good mentor. So same thing with species of extraterrestrials. We should be rejecting anyone who speaks into humanity against our will, but we should also be actively seeking out counsel from species that have our best interest in mind, that have the best outcome for humanity as their sole intent for us.
Yeah.
And I think the work that Stephen Greer is doing, where he's saying that through the protocols he has set forth, using your heart chakra to blast a green beam into the sky as a group to amplify the magnitude of that ray and use it to call species who have a loving intention for us. I wish that wasn't as crazy and new agey as it is of a process, but that's what works. That's how it works. And thousands of people are doing it successfully.
Yeah.
What Stephen Greer is saying is we should go out of our way to find mentors who love us. And what John Mack is saying, the mentors who just kind of kidnap us and do what they want with us, we might as well trust, because what can we do about it anyway? And so
Right.
I totally reject what John Mack is saying and totally like what Stephen Greer is saying.
Yeah. And it fits with an idea that I've heard about like spirits from a few different sources.
Yeah.
That anything that reaches out to you is probably bad. The good things try to stay out of it. The good things don't want to meddle with us and will be far more likely to interact with us if we reach out to them. I've heard it even like a lot more ultimately than that, but it's just hard to accept that that's entirely true. But the idea being anything that's
based
reaching
on
out to
ancient
us.
scriptures, that's not entirely true. There's times where beings just show up and say, "Hey, got a message for you. Deal with it. Here it is. Boom."
Right. And so, I think it's hard to say that it's totally that. But in almost all cases, if something is reaching out to you, it's probably you're like a plaything to it. It's like messing with you in some way and doesn't have your best intentions in mind. And the really good things are not showing up to fuck with you. You have to like reach out to them and make contact with them.
Right.
Yeah.
I as soon as I just said something that resonated as untrue to me, I questioned why and realized that some of the people whom spirits show up to in ancient scriptures were probably praying to God that they be used in whatever way God intended them to, and had probably opened themselves up to it intentionally, not knowing how they would be used, but genuinely saying, my prayer is that God would use me exactly as God wants to use me. My prayer is that the highest spirits in existence would interfere with my life so that I am of maximal benefit to everyone. And if you pray that prayer and then something like that happens, then it is invited. So maybe it isn't a hard and fast rule.
Maybe.
But certainly if you ask somebody, what do you worship? What kind of spirits do you commune with? And they say none. It's like, well, then you're in trouble because you have no idea. Like, do you invite peace or grace or love or something wonderful into your life spiritually, like regularly? Mm-hmm. Then maybe you do have good spirits communing with you. But if you don't do that at all, then what? It's just like, what do you eat? Oh, nothing in particular. Well, then probably shit. You know, what do you eat? I try to eat organic. I try to eat things that are whole, whole grains, things like that. Okay, maybe you eat some crap too, but you make an effort to eat decently. Yeah. I eat what I feel like eating in the moment. Well, that's probably crap. Yeah. Same thing with food, same thing with spirits, same thing with extraterrestrials. We need to choose what we're involving ourselves with.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Like, we need to reach out, and if something's abducting you without you asking for it, it's probably no good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Was it Thunder Immeasurable Mind?
I found something called Thunder Perfect Mind.
Thunder Perfect Mind. That's what it is. Thanks, Evan.
Cool.
I didn't have any other. Well, I guess I'm curious whether you still want to. This is my only question. Do you still want to get hypnosis to recover a potential abduction memory, now feeling that process can be misleading and harmful?
Yes. Because I think, unlike most people, I'm open to the possibility that, like, just because it shows up in my memory regression doesn't necessarily mean that it's true.
Right.
Like, so I would be interested in hearing if I'm right about that theory, that they are have a cover story that they want you to uncover. If I'm right about that, then I would still like to hear that cover story. And I just wouldn't accept it absolutely as truth. I would be interested in seeing what seems to be the case, though, and I guess would judge from there whether I think it's true or not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Give me the data and let me make what I'm going to make of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's the only question.
Cool. Xenos Report.
Thank you. Xenos Report.
Yeah.